So this is the mandible that was scanned yesterday, the Sclanida mandible. And we have built up what we call a surface model, which is basically a virtual representation of the mandible in a computer. We can separate all the teeth from the bone in the specimen. The features that we can explore show us how Neanderthal are similar to us in many aspects, but also how they are different.
The teeth of children are among the most prized of all archaeological finds, because only they can tell us how fast those children were growing up.
If we look at the pattern of eruption of the teeth, the Scladina child, by modern standards, should be about 11 or 12 years old. The second molar is almost completely erupted. But when we look at the internal structures of the enamel and dentine, it has been shown that it's in fact much younger. We know that this child died around 8 years old.
Although the boy from Scladina would have looked like us, he probably grew up much more quickly. That means he had much less time for brain development and learning. But is it safe to assume the Neanderthals were less intelligent than we are? The crucial evidence comes from skulls. Endocasts, impressions taken from the inside of Neanderthal skulls, have revealed brains with many similarities to ours.
When we look at the Neanderthal endocast, we find a frontal lobe that we can't really differentiate from modern Homo sapiens. The Broca's caps that have to do with the motor control, motor aspects of speech are thoroughly human in terms of their form.
So if the front of the Neanderthal brain is similar to ours, what about the rest of it? Today, scientists like Katerina Havarti are trying to measure fossil skulls with new precision. She uses a special instrument to digitize the skulls and create perfect three-dimensional images.
We've known for a long time that Neanderthals look different from modern humans ever since they were first discovered and described. But the question then becomes, what does this difference actually mean?
This is a digitized 3D image of our own skull, with its characteristic high dome. By contrast, the Neanderthal skull is low and elongated, possibly indicating a different brain shape. The parts of the Neanderthal brain, called the parietal and temporal lobes, may have been slightly smaller. That small difference could have had a large impact on their mental ability.
There are regions of the parietal lobes and the temporal lobes that are very important in cognition, particularly in terms of language, in memory, in remembering spatial locations.
The reduced size of those regions of Neanderthal brains might be a sign of limited thinking powers. So the bones of the boy from Scladina and his people are revealing important clues to Neanderthal behavior. They did one thing, hunting large game, and they just kept on doing it. For hundreds of thousands of years, their technology tells a similar story.
Neanderthal technology is quick and dirty. It's simple. There's very few tools that Neanderthals made that one can't copy in a few seconds or even minutes.
Although they hunted large animals, they didn't have throwing spears or arrows.
None of the stone tools that the Neanderthals made are the size and shape sufficient to be a projectile point. They're all too big, which suggests they're either knives or tips of thrusting spears.
And it was here, about 200,000 years ago, that the skulls of a new species start to be found. The last human to evolve, Homo sapiens. They are still not completely us. Their brow ridges are a little heavier, their faces a little bigger, and their technology is still simple.
If you have stone tools made by Neanderthals and stone tools made by Homo sapiens, and they're identical, you can't tell which one made the stone tools because they're making the same kinds of tools.
So what changed? What made us into the versatile beings we are today? All the evidence points to climate upheaval. All the evidence points to climate upheaval.
We enter one of the longest, coldest glacial stages on record.
Around 200,000 years ago, vast ice sheets descend. In Africa, mega droughts turn much of the continent into a desert.
And so basically you've got this double whammy of climatic challenges slamming the African population, and the people dwindle.
Geneticist Spencer Wells believes that ancient population crashes have left a footprint in our genes. It's called the bottleneck effect.
Humans, although on the surface we seem to be so different from each other, actually have remarkably little genetic diversity. We're 99.9% identical. You look at other apes like chimps or gorillas or orangutans, they have between 4 and 10 times as much diversity at the DNA level.
The lack of diversity in human DNA is a clue to a crisis that may have wiped out whole populations.
The reason that we have so little diversity at the genetic level is because we lost it at some point. Imagine that this bottle of jelly beans is the initial population. You've got so much diversity in here. What happens during a bottleneck? When you go through the bottleneck, only a few of the lineages survive. So that's the drop in population size right there. Everyone alive today is a descendant of these individuals, and you can see that we're missing many of the colors that you see in the initial population. That's how a bottleneck works. And everybody alive today is a descendant of that small number of individuals who made it through the bottleneck.
Ancient climate data shows that around 140,000 years ago, most of tropical Africa became uninhabitable. Our ancestors were forced to seek refuge on coasts and highlands.
It looks like 4 to 6 potential locations in Africa that would still be supportive of hunter-gatherer populations.
Despite the refuges, there is evidence our ancestors were pushed to the brink of extinction.
The genetic record shows us that all modern humans are descended from a small population of approximately 600 breeding individuals.
There's disagreement about the numbers and timing, but it does seem that all people on Earth are descended from a very small original population in Africa. Curtis Marion believes they lived on the South African coastline and that it was life by the sea that forced them to change. At Pinnacle Point, South Africa, he has found caves used by early Homo sapiens ancestors during the mega-drought period. They're full of clues that hint at new ways of thinking and behaving. Here, he has found some of the earliest evidence that humans were living off the sea.
This darkish material here is ash from a fireplace, and the vast majority of this material is burnt shell. So clearly there was quite a bit of cooking of shellfish that was taking place at this exact spot. 76,000 years ago. Somebody had a nice shellfish dinner there.
Here was a population that was broadening its diet away from meat, requiring ingenuity unknown among earlier ancestors.
You go out to collect shellfish at the wrong time, you're dead. You have to be able to time your access to the coastline so that you are here when the tides are right to collect those shellfish.
The best time to collect shellfish is at extreme low tides. And to predict those, it helps to understand the cycles of the moon.
Those are the times that you want to be collecting shellfish. all the shellfish are exposed. So this water, which you see here, is out there at that point where that rock is. So the smart coastal hunter-gatherer knows how to use the moon to signal to them when to come to the coastline to collect the shellfish.
The people of Pinnacle Point were not just harvesting shellfish, they were also hunting on the plains behind the coast and gathering berries and roots. Their way of life reflected a new versatility.
The systematic use of coastal resources does suggest a cognitive complexity.
Our ancestors occupied these caves for over 140,000 years, leaving behind an amazing record of their transformation.
This site documents a change in the way that people made stone tools. At the bottom of the sequence, they made stone tools with this rough quartzite material. And then right at about 71,000 years ago, which occurs just about there in the sequence, they make a shift to making stone tools on this silkrete in the form of long, thin blades. Before flaking it, the people here were heating this material in the fire, and through heating it, improved its flakability. And that was at about 71,000 years ago. About 40,000 years older than that has been found anywhere else in the world.
The technology of our ancestors was expanding from the single all-purpose hand axe to a variety of lighter, specialized tools.
Then they started to make these kinds of things. They made tools with special little points for perforating tasks. Like this. They made others with special little chisel ends for carving tasks.
Specialized tools allowed our ancestors to get more out of their environment. But this wasn't the only change.
And at this point, we begin to see people treating stone tools as symbols. They're making them more complex than they need to be to accomplish a particular cutting task. So at this point, stone tools are no longer just tools for cutting things. They're instruments of carrying social information about their owners.
A new type of symbolic consciousness was emerging. The first evidence of decorative art made from a naturally occurring mineral called red ochre has been found at Blombos, another cave along the South African coast.
While we were excavating more or less in this area you can see over here, we found a chunk of ochre, and when we brushed up the surface of the ochre, we realized that there was actually a design on the one side. And once we looked at it in more detail, held it up to the light, we could see a cross-hatched pattern that had lines zigzagged across the surface of this flat ground surface, and also had lines across the top, through the middle, and along the bottom. And you can imagine there was enormous excitement because we did not expect to find something that might represent a symbolic image in these 75,000-year-old levels. So this really was an enormous surprise for us.
At Blombos, they've also found shells with holes drilled in them, believed to have been used for necklaces. So our ancestors were now wearing ornaments and probably painting their bodies as well.
For me, what is really important is here, for the first time, really ever, we have evidence that people can store information outside of the human brain.
It is the birth of a new type of human culture. More complex, but easier to pass on from generation to generation. "60,000 years ago, our ancestors emerged with new technology and new culture. Thousands of years of drought had forced them to change. They were ready to explore the world. As the climate improved, they started to stream out of Africa. In the beginning, climate upheavals made us what we are. They taught us a new inventiveness which has led to a cascade of technological advances. But exactly what made us different is still an enigma. Soon, we'll discover the genetic changes unique to our species. But genes are only part of what makes us special. The other part is that mysterious creation, unique to humans, culture.
Homo sapiens is the most adaptable species in the human career, meaning that no matter what happens in the world, we have a way of adapting to it. Today, that way is called culture. If glaciers came to Arizona where I live, we wouldn't be growing thick fur and thick skin. We would be building more fireplaces and heating systems.
Culture is the storehouse of our complex ways of thinking and perceiving. And we pass it on to our children as surely as we pass on our genes. The ways in which cultural evolution and genetic evolution interact will be at the forefront of the research of tomorrow. Because one thing is for sure, evolution is not stopping.
The rate of evolution at the genomic level has increased over the last 10,000 years, and it probably will continue over the next few thousand years.
Where it will take us, nobody knows. But we're still a young species. There is a long future ahead.